The scent of old paper and decaying leather was the only perfume Rowena Croft wore anymore. She preferred it. Perfume was for the living, for women who attended parties and laughed with their husbands and held babies in their arms. The archives, on the other hand, they were for ghosts. And at 40 years old, a ghost was all she felt like. Her fingers, nimble and sure, traced the fractured spine of a forgotten book of lore. Here, in the quiet dust, she wasn't a burden. She wasn't the unmarried elder daughter of Lord Valerius Croft. Here she was a historian, a preserver. She was useful. Without warning, the heavy oak door creaked open, spilling a blade of bright, cheerful light across the dusty floor. It was an invasion. Rowena? Oh, there you are, hiding away with your smelly old books again. Her younger sister, Lyra, breezed in, smelling of roses and sunshine and everything Rowena was not. She was a vision in silk, her fingers adorned with rings that glittered with every little movement. To make things worse, she was glowing, her hand resting protectively on her slightly rounded belly. "Hello, Lyra." Rowena's voice was soft, unused. "You look well." "Oh, I'm wonderful. Alistair just bought me this." She wiggled her fingers, the diamonds flashing like cruel stars. "A pre-push present," he called it. "Isn't he just the sweetest?" Rowena simply nodded, her gaze falling back to the book. She didn't know what scared her more, the casual way Lyra flaunted her happiness, or the deep, aching void it exposed inside her own chest. "Honestly, Rowie, you have to come out of this dungeon. Father's gala is tonight. Have you even thought about what you'll wear?" Lyra picked her way through the stacks of books, her nose wrinkled in distaste. "You can't wear that gray thing again. You look like a moth." Deep down, she knew the truth. She was a moth, drawn to the quiet darkness, while Lyra was the butterfly, demanding the attention of the sun. "I hadn't thought about it," she murmured. Lyra sighed, a dramatic, pitying sound that scraped Rowena's nerves raw. "It's just, don't you want more than this? Don't you ever get lonely?" Before the words left her lips, Rowena wanted to scream, "I am lonely every second of every day." Instead, she offered a small, brittle smile. "I have my books." "Right, your books." Lyra's eyes softened with that familiar, unbearable pity. "You know, I heard one of the maids talking, a silly old rumor, about Mother." Her breath caught. "What about her?" "Just about her accident. How it happened so close to these archives. Father hates it when anyone brings it up. It's just strange, isn't it?" Lyra shrugged, already bored with the topic. "Anyway, you should borrow my emerald dress. It would at least give you some color." As the silence stretched, Rowena stared at the door long after Lyra had gone. The mention of her mother was a ghost she hadn't confronted in years, a story her father had buried deep. Maybe it was fate, Lyra bringing it up now. The archives suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. That night, she knew, would be no different from any other night. She would be a shadow in her father's brilliant hall, a footnote in the story of his success. A quiet, useless, lonely burden. Moments later, that feeling of being a ghost became a weapon used against her. The dining hall at Croft Manor was a cavern of polished mahogany and glittering crystal. It was a cold room, designed to impress, not to comfort. She sat at the far end of the long table, a solitary island in a sea of polished wood. Her father, Lord Valerius Croft, sat at the head, a king upon a lonely throne. The silence between them was a living thing, thick and suffocating. "The guest list for the gala is finalized," he said, not looking at her. His voice was like the chink of coins, hard, metallic, and devoid of warmth. "Alpha Marcus and his Luna will be in attendance. Their third child is on the way. A powerful match." Rowena's fork froze over her plate. She knew this speech. It was a performance, and she was the captive audience. He continued, his eyes scanning a piece of parchment. "The Silverwood pack has also confirmed. Their alpha just claimed a new mate. A young thing, barely 20. but her family's lands are rich in silver, a valuable asset. Asset. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. With every heartbeat, she felt herself shrinking. Then, he finally looked at her. His eyes, the same shade of gray as a winter sky, were filled with a chilling disappointment. He gestured vaguely at her with his fork. So many powerful alliances being forged, so many powerful families securing their futures, heirs being born. He took a slow sip of wine, his gaze never leaving hers. A beat later, he let out a soft, calculated sigh. A pity some assets failed to appreciate? Her chest ached. The food on her plate turned to ash in her mouth. Her goal for the dinner had been simple: survive. Just survive. But his words were precisely aimed arrows, each one dipped in the poison of her deepest insecurities. She knew she had to stay silent, because any protest, any flicker of pain in her eyes would only encourage him. His cruelty was a sport. On the other hand, he continued, setting his wine glass down with a sharp click, there are obstacles. He spat the word out. That brute from the mountains, Alpha Malric of the Shadow Moon Pack, has decided to grace us with his presence. Her head snapped up. She'd heard the name, of course. A powerful, reclusive alpha who commanded a territory her father desperately wanted access to. He was a myth, a wild wolf who didn't play by the rules of their polite political society. "Why is he coming?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her father gave a cruel smile. "Because I invited him, of course, to discuss a land dispute. The man is a rock, stubborn, uncivilized, but a necessary evil to manage." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "He's a threat to the deal I've almost finalized with the Stonefangs to secure our eastern territories. He needs to be reminded of his place." In that moment, her father's web of politics felt vast and terrifying. He spoke of alphas and territories like they were pieces on a chessboard, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she was just another piece to him. A broken one, to be sure, but one he could still use to mock his opponents. What's worse, she felt a strange, inexplicable pull toward the name he'd spoken with such contempt. Malric. The name felt like a rumble of distant thunder, a promise of a storm she couldn't possibly imagine was heading straight for her.
Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the biting mountain air, the storm was already brewing. The thud of a body hitting packed earth was the only sound that broke the silence. Malric stood over his beta, Jax, whose chest was heaving as he gasped for breath. The air smelled of pine, sweat, and the coming snow. It was a good smell, an honest smell. "You're getting slow, Jax," Malric grunted, offering a hand to pull his friend up. He was a large man, built of the mountains themselves, all hard muscle and uncompromising strength. His black hair was long, tied back from a face that looked carved from granite. Jax slapped his hand away and rose on his own, wiping a smear of mud from his face. "Or you're just getting meaner in your old age, Alpha. You fight like you've got a devil on your back." Truth be told, Malric felt like he had a whole legion of them. He was the Alpha of the Shadow Moon Pack, and that meant he carried the weight of every single one of his people on his shoulders. A weight his own father had fumbled. He would not make the same mistake. "The devil's name is complacency," Malric said, his voice a low growl. "And he lives in the lowlands, in mansions built on lies." Jax nodded, his expression turning serious. "You're talking about the party. Croft's gala. You still think you have to go?" "I do." Malric grabbed a water skin, the cold liquid doing little to cool the fire in his gut. He had to go to Croft's ridiculous party, because ignoring a political snake like Valerius Croft was the fastest way to get bitten. "The Stonefang Pack has been raiding our southern patrols. They're getting bolder, better funded, and Croft owns the only trade routes they could be using for supplies without us knowing." "You think Croft is in bed with the Stonefangs?" Jax spat on the ground. "That man is human filth, but he's not stupid. The Stonefangs would turn on him the second it suited them." That's why I have to go, Malric repeated, his golden eyes hardening. I need to look him in the eye. I need to smell the lies on him myself. His father's great failure had been trust. He'd seen the good in people even when it wasn't there. He'd trusted a rival alpha who had then allied with hunters, leading to a massacre that had almost broken their pack. Malric had rebuilt it on a foundation of strength, vigilance, and absolute mistrust of outsiders. He would not be his father. He would not let a smooth-talking lord with a fat purse bring ruin to his people. Just be careful, Jax warned. Those lowland political games, they're not our world. It's all whispers and poison, not tooth and claw. Malric stared south, toward the distant lands of men like Croft. He could almost feel the cloying sweetness of their cities, the stench of their greed. He hated it. He hated leaving his mountains, his people. But an alpha protects his own. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was different. It wasn't just politics. It was a shift in the wind, a prickle of fate on his skin he couldn't ignore. He turned back to Jax, his face a mask of grim resolve. Get the men ready. We leave at dusk. His world was one of tooth and claw, of loyalty written in blood, and he was about to walk into a den of vipers ready to strike down anyone who threatened his home.
The gala was a masterpiece of misery. 100 smiling predators were packed into her father's grand ballroom, their laughter like the shattering of glass. Rowena stood near a pillar, clad in the borrowed emerald dress Lyra had insisted upon. She felt like a fraud, a plain gray moth forced into the glittering skin of a jewel beetle. Her goal was simple, desperate, to be a statue, to be so still, so quiet, that she would merge with the marble and disappear entirely. But then, her father raised a glass. His voice, slick with false charm, boomed across the room. "To my daughters," he toasted, his eyes finding Lyra and their other sister, Elena, each standing proudly beside their powerful mates. "To strong alliances and the future of our legacies." The room applauded. And then, his gaze shifted. It slid across the crowd and landed on her. The smile on his face was pure poison. "And to those who also serve," he said, a casual, cutting dismissal, "even if only to stand and wait." The words struck her, not with the familiar sting of a whip, but with the cold, heavy finality of a tomb door slamming shut. The air thickened. Humiliation, hot and suffocating, washed over her. Her pulse raced, a frantic bird trapped in the cage of her ribs. She wanted to run, to scream, to simply cease to exist. In that moment, everything changed. The music faltered. The chatter died. A sudden, chilling silence fell over the ballroom as the great doors swung open. He stood there, and he was not a man. He was a force of nature. Alpha Malric was a walking storm, his presence sucking the very air from the room. He was larger than she'd imagined, dressed in simple, dark clothing that made the silks and jewels of the other men look like children's costumes. His eyes, a startling, luminous gold, swept the crowd with absolute disinterest. They were the eyes of a wolf, ancient and wild. As if pulled by a string, her own eyes locked with his. Her world tilted. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through her, from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet. The space between them burned, and the noisy, glittering ballroom faded into a dull gray blur. There was only him. With every heartbeat, he moved closer, his path a straight, unwavering line directly to her. He ignored her father's sputtering attempt at a greeting. He ignored the gasps of the crowd. He walked as if she were the only person in the entire world. He stopped before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He smelled of pine trees after a winter storm, of cold, clean air, and something else. Something primal and utterly masculine. Something her soul answered. He lowered his head, his nose just inches from the curve of her neck, and inhaled. It was a deep, possessive sound that sent fire blooming beneath her skin. When he looked at her again, his golden eyes were blazing. A single word left his lips, a low, rumbling growl that was not a request, but a statement of absolute fact. A claim. Mine.
The stench hit him the moment he stepped into the ballroom, a sickening mix of cloying perfumes, greed, and the sour tang of deceit. He hated it. This world of fake smiles and veiled threats was a cage, and he was a wolf who did not belong in a cage. His gaze swept the room, dismissing the preening peacocks in their fine suits. He was here for one reason: to find Valerius Croft and sever the head of the snake before it could strike his pack. But then, he felt it. A pull. A sudden, violent magnetic force that seized him, yanking his soul toward a fixed point in the room. His instincts surged, a tidal wave of pure, primal possessiveness that drowned out every other thought. He followed it, his body moving on instinct, cutting through the stunned crowd like a ship through water. And then he saw her. She was standing by a pillar, looking so utterly lost, a wildflower trying to survive in a meticulously manicured but soulless garden. He saw the emerald of her dress, but more importantly, he saw the storm of humiliation in her gray eyes, courtesy of the man who had sired her, Valerius Croft. His wolf pressed forward, a snarl rising in his throat at the sight of her pain. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. It narrowed to this woman, to the scent of old books and quiet resilience that clung to her like a second skin. She was the eye of the hurricane, the sudden, shocking calm in the chaos of his life. She was the anchor his soul had been searching for. She was mate. He walked to her, the rest of the world fading to insignificant noise. He stopped, needing to confirm what his entire being was screaming at him. He inhaled her scent, a heady mix of lavender and parchment, and a unique, clean fragrance that was hers alone. It was the scent of home. A growl rose in his throat, an ancient, instinctual sound of claiming. He looked into her wide, terrified eyes and spoke the truth that was now etched in fire across his soul. Mine. The word echoed in the dead, silent room. But then he saw it. Not joy, not relief. Just pure, unadulterated terror. Her breath caught, her lovely face paling. He followed her gaze and saw Valerius Croft, whose initial shock was already morphing into a greedy, calculating smirk. The man saw not his daughter finally finding her mate, but a sudden, unexpected business opportunity. An asset. The thought enraged Malric. Without another word, he moved, shifting his body to physically block her from her father's view. He would be her shield. He was the alpha, a protector, and this woman was now the most precious part of his territory. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. I am not him, he promised, his voice rough. I am not a threat to you. But her eyes, wide and luminous with unshed tears, stared at him as if he were the executioner himself. And he watched her lips tremble as she whispered the one word that felt like a blade twisting in his gut. No.
No. The word was a breath, a whisper of denial against a tidal wave. But it was all she had. In the quiet that followed, her rejection hung in the air, a fragile, impossible thing. Malric's golden eyes, which had been blazing with a fire that both terrified and thrilled her, shuddered. Not with anger, but with a flicker of something that looked shockingly like hurt. Before she could process that, her father was there. He moved with the oily smoothness of a serpent, placing a proprietary hand on her shoulder. Her skin crawled at his touch. My daughter is overwhelmed, Lord Valerius said, his voice dripping with false concern as he addressed Malric. You must forgive her. This is all very sudden, a surprise to be sure, but perhaps a welcome one. Alpha Malric, let us retire to my study to discuss this new arrangement. Arrangement. That single word was a slap. It was the crack of a cage door locking shut. Her whole life had been an arrangement dictated by him, an arrangement of loneliness, of shame, of being a failed asset. And now, in a single heartbeat, She was to be part of a new one, a pawn traded from one powerful man to another. All her terror, all her humiliation suddenly crystallized into a single sharp point of fury. Her body moved on instinct. She shrugged off her father's hand as if it were poison. She stepped away from the pillar that had been her refuge and planted her feet on the marble floor. She was still terrified. Her heart was still trying to beat its way out of her chest. But for the first time in her life, she was not going to be silent. She turned her back on her father, an act of rebellion so profound it made her dizzy, and faced the wild alpha. She lifted her chin and met his intense, searching gaze. "If I go with you," she said, her voice trembling but clear, cutting through the suffocating silence of the ballroom. "It will not be as part of his arrangement." She shot a venomous glare at her father. "I am not an asset to be traded. I go with you, on my own terms, or I do not go at all." The words were out, bold and final. As the echo faded, she felt a wave of lightheadedness. What had she done? What's worse, what would this terrifying man do? Would he laugh? Would he dismiss her as her father always had? Instead, something shifted in his expression. The hurt was gone, replaced by a slow, burning ember of respect. A dangerous smile touched the corner of his mouth, and it wasn't directed at her. It was aimed squarely at her stunned and furious father. "Her terms," Malric's voice boomed, a declaration of power that made the crystal glasses on a nearby table tremble, "are the only ones that matter." Without taking his eyes off Lord Valerius, he extended a hand to her. It was not a command. It was an invitation, an escape. As her name hung in the air, whispered by the stunned crowd, she made a choice. She put her trembling hand in his. His skin was warm and rough, his grip strong and sure. And as he led her from the ballroom, leaving her father standing amidst the wreckage of his own party, she didn't feel like a ghost anymore. She felt like someone who had just set fire to her own cage. The journey was a blur of silent speed and roaring wind. Rowena sat beside Malric in a vehicle that was more beast than machine, leaving the manicured lawns and glittering lights of her father's world behind. She didn't know what scared her more, the cage she had just escaped or the terrifying unknown wilderness she was hurtling toward. But then, as they climbed higher and higher into the mountains, the air changed. It grew clean and sharp, scented with pine and cold stone. It was the first truly clean breath she had taken in 40 years. Soon after they arrived, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. The Shadow Moon Warren wasn't a castle or a fortress. It was alive. It was a series of massive lodges and dwellings built directly into the side of a mountain, connected by rope bridges and stone pathways, all nestled under the canopy of an ancient, sleeping forest. Smoke curled from dozens of chimneys, and the sound of distant laughter echoed on the wind, real and unforced. It was wild, untamed, and beautiful. As Malric led her toward the largest of the lodges, she felt dozens of eyes on her. Not the cold, judging eyes of the gala, but curious, wary, and deeply suspicious. Her borrowed emerald dress felt laughably out of place against the practical leather and wool worn by the pack members. In the span of a breath, she felt like a fragile porcelain doll set down in a warrior's forge. She was an outsider, an enemy. "This will be our lodge." Malric's voice was a low rumble beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. The inside was like him, all dark, warm wood, worn leather, and the faint, pleasant scent of wood smoke. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows that made the room feel intimate and vast at the same time. There were no gilded mirrors or crystal chandeliers. There were furs on the floor, shelves overflowing with mismatched mugs, and a weapon rack holding an axe that looked impossibly heavy. It wasn't a house. It was a den. "You are safe here, Rowena," he said, his golden eyes watching her with an unnerving intensity. "No one will harm you." Deep down, she knew the truth. He might protect her from physical harm, but he couldn't protect her from the quiet hostility she felt radiating from his people. He couldn't protect her from the fact that she was the daughter of their enemy. She was a cuckoo in the wolf's nest, and she had no idea how to survive. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't silence the voice in her head, her father's voice whispering that she was a burden, and she had just brought all of her trouble right to this pack's front door. That night, alone in a room that smelled of him, she didn't feel free. She felt more trapped than ever before.
The moment he'd settled Rowena in his lodge, he called his council. They met in the Great Hall, the heart of the Warren, a longhouse built around a central fire pit. His beta, Jax, and his senior enforcers, Anya among them, sat at the heavy wooden table, their faces grim. The air was thick with tension. "You brought Lord Croft's daughter here?" Jax's voice was incredulous, cutting straight to the point. "The daughter of the man we suspect is arming the Stonefangs? Have you lost your mind, Malric?" Malric stood before the fire, its light making his shadow a giant on the wall. He had expected this. He had known this was coming. He had to be their alpha first, mate second. That's why he had to show no weakness. "I have not lost my mind," he said, his voice calm and dangerously low. "I found my mate." A murmur went through the room. They understood the bond, the finality of it. But they were warriors, and their survival depended on logic, not fate. "A mate who could be a spy," Anya pointed out, her voice sharp. She was his best tracker, and her eyes missed nothing. "A weakness he planted for you to find, a way to get inside our home, to learn our defenses. He played you, Malric." "He did not play me," Malric snarled, his wolf pressing forward, the fire in his eyes flaring. He fought for control. He couldn't lead with rage. Not only that, he had to make them understand. "I saw her. I saw what he does to her. He treats her like a failed investment, a piece of property he was mocking in front of 100 people. She is not his spy. She is his prisoner." "Or that's what she wants you to think," Jax countered, slamming a fist on the table. "Her father is a snake. Why would the apple fall far from the tree? We are at war, Malric. We cannot afford this risk." He was right. Truth be told, the risk was enormous. His pack's safety came before everything, even his own fated mate, which meant he had to find a balance between his duty and his heart. "She is my mate," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She will be treated with respect. But," he turned, his gaze falling on Anya, "she will not be left alone. You will be her shadow, Anya, her guide, and her guard. Stay with her, teach her our ways, and watch her. Watch every move she makes and every word she speaks. Am I clear?" He had to do this because it was the only way to appease his council while protecting Rowena. It was a cage of a different kind for her, he knew, but it was a necessary one until she could prove she was one of them. Anya nodded, her expression unreadable. "Crystal, Alpha." As he dismissed them, the weight on his shoulders felt heavier than the mountain itself. He had brought a fragile doe into his den of wolves. He had claimed her, and now he had to protect her, not just from the enemies outside their walls, but from the suspicious allies sitting around his own fire. The path ahead was a dangerous one, and he knew with a grim certainty that one wrong step could get them all killed.
The next evening was a trial by fire. A woman named Anya, her guard, though the word was never spoken, led her to the communal dining hall. It was loud and warm, filled with the smells of roasting meat and damp wool. Dozens of pack members sat at long, rough-hewn tables, and when she walked in, a hush fell. Every eye turned to her. She felt like a lamb walking into a feast where she was the main course. Malric sat at the head table, and he gestured for her to sit beside him. The seat felt like a throne of judgment. She kept her eyes on her plate, her hands trembling in her lap. Then a voice, raspy and old, cut through the quiet. "So, this is the one. The city dweller. Lord Croft's precious little bird." Rowena looked up. An old woman, an elder, with a face like a roadmap of scars and a sneer that could curdle milk, was staring at her. Her name was Griselda. Her hands have never seen a day's work, Griselda continued, her voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. What good is a Luna with soft hands and a fragile heart? She will break before the first winter snow. The hall was dead silent. Humiliation, a familiar burning cloak, settled over Rowena. She could feel Malric tense beside her, a low growl starting in his chest, ready to defend her. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. It was the memory of her father's sneer, of Lyra's pity. She was so tired of being defended, so tired of being seen as weak. Before Malric could speak, Rowena's voice, quiet but clear, filled the hall. You are Griselda of the Stonefall line, are you not? The elder blinked, surprised. I am. Your great-grandmother was Alara, Rowena continued, her voice gaining strength. She remembered the passage from one of her old books, a history of the mountain packs. She was not a warrior. Her hands were soft, too. But it was her wisdom, her knowledge of the old treaties that saved this pack from a border war with the Sunstone clan. She fought with her mind, not her claws. As the silence stretched, Griselda's jaw hung slightly open. The entire hall stared, stunned. Rowena had not raised her voice. She had not been defensive. She had simply answered. She had used the knowledge from her dusty, lonely world as a shield. With every heartbeat, she held the old woman's gaze, her own heart pounding. She had not only defended herself, she had honored the pack's history. She had shown them that there was more than one kind of strength. Eventually, a slow smile cracked across Griselda's wrinkled face. She raised her drinking horn. To Alara, she rasped. The hall erupted in cheers, the pack members raising their own horns. To Alara! As the tension broke, Rowena chanced a look at Malric. He was staring at her, and the raw pride and undisguised admiration in his golden eyes sent a jolt of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a small victory, a tiny foothold in this wild new world. But as she looked at the faces around her, she knew the fight to belong here, to truly earn her place, had only just begun. A few days later, a sliver of confidence had begun to stitch itself into the fabric of her soul. She spent her time in the Shadow Moon archives, a dusty, neglected chamber that felt more like home than any room in her father's manor, helping to organize their history. The pack members still watched her, but now their suspicion was mingled with a grudging curiosity. It was a start. But then, her old life came calling. A rider bearing the Croft sigil arrived, requesting an audience. He delivered a sealed parchment scroll to Malric, who brought it to her in the quiet of the archives. Her father's elegant, cruel script filled the page. He wrote of his deep concern for her welfare, his worry that she was being held against her will. He spoke of a family matter, a sudden illness of her favorite aunt, and begged her to return home, just for a few days, so he could know she was safe. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Every word a carefully crafted lie designed to pull at the heartstrings of the dutiful daughter she used to be. The old Rowena would have wept. The old Rowena would have been torn by guilt and duty. But the woman standing in the Shadow Moon archives was not the old Rowena. She felt the letter for what it was, a baited hook. A gilded cage being offered to a bird that had just tasted the sky. He's lying, she said, her voice flat. My Aunt Elspeth is as healthy as a horse. He thinks I'm a fool, or that you are. Malric stood beside her, his presence a solid wall of warmth. He read the letter over her shoulder, his scent, pine and winter, a comforting anchor. A low growl rumbled in his chest. He thinks you are his property, and he is calling you to heal. Deep down, she knew the truth. This was a test. Her father was testing her loyalty, and at the same time, he was testing Malric's control. For the first time, she and the powerful alpha beside her were not just mate and reluctant partner. They were allies, strategists in a war she was only just beginning to understand. What do we do? She asked, looking up at him. We do what you want to do, he corrected her, his golden eyes intense. He is your father. This is your choice. In that moment, he gave her something no one else ever had: power. The power to choose her own path. And her choice was clear. Because of that, she felt a surge of strength. "Then we will tell him no," she said, her voice firm. Together, they drafted a reply. Her words, his authority. It was a polite, formal, and utterly unyielding refusal. It spoke of her new life, her new loyalties, and her decision to remain with her mate. As she sealed the scroll with the Shadow Moon's wolf head sigil instead of her father's, she felt a profound sense of severance. She was not just sending a message, she was making a declaration of war. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that her father would answer in kind.
The answer came 3 nights later. It came not as a letter, but as a scream that ripped through the winter night. Malric was on his feet before the echo faded, a blade in his hand, his heart pounding with a cold, primal dread. He burst from his lodge into chaos. The Southern Patrol, the one he'd sent to watch the very routes they'd discussed, was staggering back into the warren, bearing the wounded and the dead. "Ambush!" a warrior choked out, blood pouring from a gash on his face. "Stone fangs, a dozen of them, they knew our route. They were waiting for us." Rage, cold and absolute, seized Malric. This was a direct result of his defiance, of their defiance. This was Croft's retaliation. He knew it in his bones. "Get the wounded to the healer," he roared, his alpha command cutting through the panic. "Someone give me a full report, now." But then, Jack stumbled forward, holding a wounded warrior upright. "There's more, Malric," he said, his voice grim. "We took one alive." The Stonefang prisoner was a snarling, hateful beast of a wolf, chained between 2 of Malric's biggest enforcers. They dragged him to the center of the warren, his eyes spitting defiance. Malric faced him, his own wolf pressing hard against his skin, demanding release. He had to be calm. He needed information more than he needed vengeance. "Why?" Malric's voice was a low growl. "Why the ambush? We have no quarrel with you this far north." The wolf spat a mouthful of blood onto the ground. "Orders are orders." "Whose orders?" Malric pressed, stepping closer, his shadow falling over the prisoner. The wolf just laughed, a broken, ugly sound. "You think I'll tell you anything, Shadow Moon Dog?" But then, something inside Malric shifted. He saw the wolf's gear. The blade was high-quality steel, not the crude iron the Stonefangs usually carried. And the leather armor. It was finely tooled. Expensive. Far too expensive for a common raiding party. Without another word, he reached down and ripped a small, coded ledger from the wolf's belt. The prisoner's eyes widened in panic, and in that moment Malric knew he had it. He took the ledger to his war room, Jax and Anya at his side. It took them less than an hour to break the simple merchant's code. As the last symbol was translated, the words resolved on the page, stark and damning. A list of payments, shipments of weapons, and at the bottom, a signed authorization for the attack. The signature was not the Stonefang Alpha's. It was elegant, precise, and utterly unmistakable. It was the signature of Lord Valerius Croft. Anya gasped. Jack swore, a long, vile curse. But Malric felt nothing but a terrifying, silent cold. It was proof. Undeniable, soul-shattering proof. This wasn't just a border dispute. It wasn't a political game. It was a deep and personal betrayal, an act of war orchestrated by the father of the woman sleeping in his lodge. The stakes had just changed entirely. This was no longer about territory. This was about survival. As the truth unraveled, he grabbed the ledger, his knuckles white. He had to tell her. He had to show her the monster her father truly was.
She was woken by the sounds of shouting and grief. A terrible cold dread seeped into her bones, and she threw on a robe, her heart pounding. She found Malric in the war room, his back to her, staring at a map. The air in the room was thick with a grief so heavy it felt hard to breathe. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happened?" He turned, and the look on his face stole the air from her lungs. His usual stern control was gone, replaced by a raw, glacial fury. In his hand, he held a piece of parchment. He didn't say a word. He just held it out to her. Her hands shook as she took it. She saw the columns of numbers, the lists of weapons, and then she saw the signature at the bottom, her father's signature. The elegant script she had known her entire life now looked like a venomous snake coiled at the bottom of the page. Her thoughts spun. It couldn't be. An ambush? Dead warriors? Because of him? Because of her letter? He paid them. Malric's voice was rough, strained. He paid the Stonefangs to attack my patrol, to kill my people, all because we told him no. The world tilted. The floor seemed to fall away beneath her. A part of her had always known her father was cruel, that he was ruthless, but this was monstrous. This was the work of a man with no soul. He hadn't just mocked her. He had used her as a pretense to commit murder. The men who died tonight, their blood was on her hands. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the breath from her body. A terrible, ragged sob ripped through her. Her legs gave out. No. But then, before she could hit the floor, he was there. His arms, strong and sure, wrapped around her, pulling her against his hard chest. He held her tightly as the sobs racked her body, as the last broken remnants of the girl who had once loved her father shattered into a million pieces. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just held her, absorbing her grief, his own silent fury a tangible shield around her. She cried for the men who had died. She cried for the monster who was her father. And she cried for the lost, lonely woman she had been for so long. Between them, something cracked. The formal distance, the careful hesitance. It all dissolved in the face of this shared, horrific truth. He was her mate, yes. But in this moment, held in his arms, her face buried in his chest, he became something more. He was her ally, her sanctuary, the only solid ground in a world that had just been ripped apart. As the echo of her grief faded in the quiet room, she held on to him, her last thread of loyalty to her bloodline finally, irrevocably severed. Her father was her enemy, and this man, this wild, dangerous alpha, was her only hope. Grief, she learned, was a strange and powerful fuel. In the days that followed the ambush, the hole in her heart left by her father's betrayal did not close. Instead, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize within it. She would not be a victim. She would not be a pawn. She would be a weapon. Because of that, she threw herself into the one place where she had always found clarity: the archives. But this time, she was not hiding. She was hunting. She spent every waking hour poring over the Shadow Moon's history, their maps, their patrol logs, their ancient treaties. Malric would bring her meals, his silent presence a comforting warmth at her back. He never pushed, never questioned. He simply trusted her. And that trust was a greater motivator than fear had ever been. Her fingers, stained with ink and dust, traced the faded lines of a century-old map. It showed the borderlands her father's family had once owned before they were ceded to the Shadow Moon Pack as part of a treaty. Most of the territory was wild, impassable. But then she saw it, a thin, spidery line marked with a cartographer's forgotten note. Old Saltway, treacherous, unused since the rockslide of 28. Her heart skipped. It was a path, a forgotten road, hidden by a rockslide that had happened long before she was born. A road that would not be on any modern maps, but one that might exist in the old Croft family records. A road her father, with his obsessive pride in his own lineage, would almost certainly know about. Without thinking, her body moved on instinct. She grabbed the map and ran from the archives, her pulse racing. She found Malric in the training yard, sparring with Jax. She didn't wait for them to finish. "I found it," she said, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she unrolled the brittle parchment on a nearby table. "I found a weakness." She pointed to the faded line. "This path, it bypasses the main watchposts. If the Stonefangs are receiving supplies or if they plan another ambush, this is where they would do it. My father would know this route. He would see it as a blind spot. Jax and Malric leaned in, their expressions skeptical at first, then slowly turning to ones of dawning realization. Jax looked from the map to her, and for the first time, the open hostility in his eyes was replaced with a flicker of something else. Respect. Malric traced the path with his finger, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A snake will always use a hidden path. He then looked at her, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive pride that made the air thicken. You have done well, Rowena. You have given us a blade to turn against him. In that moment, standing between the two most powerful warriors in the pack, she was not Lord Croft's fragile daughter. She was the Luna of the Shadow Moon, and she had just drawn the map for their revenge.
The night was moonless and cold, the wind a razor blade against the skin. It was perfect. Malric led a small elite team of his 5 best warriors, Jax at his side, through the treacherous, forgotten path Rowena had found. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft crunch of their boots on the frozen ground. Every one of them moved with the lethal grace of a predator. Truth be told, his wolf was surging, alive with the thrill of the hunt. But it was more than that. This was not a defense. This was an attack, planned and orchestrated using the mind of his mate. The thought filled him with a pride so fierce it was almost painful. She was not just his heart, she was his strategist, his queen. They reached the clearing Rowena had marked on the map just before midnight, and they waited. He had to trust her instincts because she knew her father's mind better than anyone. She knew his arrogance, his love of secret knowledge, his belief that he was smarter than everyone else. Moments later they heard it, the soft tread of paws on snow. A dozen Stonefang wolves, their fur bristling, moved into the clearing. They were not a simple raiding party. They were heavily armed, escorting a mule laden with weapon crates. They were arrogant, confident in their hidden route. They were walking into a trap. Malric gave the silent signal. What followed was not a battle. It was a reaping. His warriors descended from the shadows like ghosts, a whirlwind of claw and steel. The fight was brutal, swift, and utterly decisive. Malric himself moved through the enemy ranks like a blur of death, his fury a cold, precise thing. He fought for his pack. He fought for the men they had lost. And he fought for the woman who had made this victory possible. Within minutes, it was over. Several Stonefangs lay dead. The rest were captured, bound, and disarmed. They had not lost a single warrior. As the silence returned, Jax came to his side, breathing heavily. Her instincts were perfect, Jax said, his voice filled with a reverence Malric had never heard from him before. She knew. She truly knew. Malric looked at the captured weapons, at the cowering prisoners. This was a major blow to the Stonefangs, and a direct message to Lord Valerius. It was a message that said, "We know what you are doing. We see your secrets, and we are coming for you." That night, when he returned to the Warren, he went straight to the archives. He found Rowena asleep at the table, her head pillowed on an open book, a single lantern casting a warm golden glow on her face. He looked at her, so peaceful in her sleep, and his heart ached with a depth of feeling he had never known. She was brilliant. She was resilient. She was his. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and her eyes fluttered open. Before she could speak, he said the only words that mattered. "It was a complete success. Your knowledge saved my men's lives, Rowena." And the look of brilliant, relieved joy on her face was a greater prize than any victory in battle.
The victory was a heady wine. For days, the atmosphere in the Warren was different. The pack looked at her with new eyes. They called her Luna, not with the hesitance of duty, but with genuine respect. A fragile, tentative hope began to bloom in her chest, a feeling so foreign she barely recognized it. She and Malric fell into a new rhythm, one of shared purpose, and a quiet, simmering intimacy that left her breathless. Maybe, just maybe, she could be happy here. But then, her father sent his reply. It was not a letter. It was a small, velvet-wrapped box delivered by a terrified human messenger who fled as soon as it was delivered. Anya brought it to her in the lodge, her expression worried. With trembling fingers, Rowena opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a silver locket. Her breath caught. It was her mother's, an oval locket with a single faded rose etched on the front. She hadn't seen it in over 20 years, not since the day her mother had died. The accident, they had called it. A fall from a balcony near the archives. Her fingers, numb with a sudden icy dread, fumbled to open it. The tiny familiar click echoed in the silent room. Inside was the miniature portrait of her mother, a beautiful, sad-eyed woman. But there was something else. A small, folded piece of parchment tucked behind the portrait. Under the weight of his stare, though he wasn't there, she could feel it. She unfolded the note. It was her father's handwriting. Only a few words. Some burdens are better off shed. She learned that. So will you. Her world tilted. The air rushed from her lungs. It wasn't just a threat. It was a confession. Her mother's death. The fall. The archives. The rumors Lyra had mentioned. It all slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. He had killed her. Her father had killed her mother. He had called his own wife a burden and had simply shed her. And now he was promising her the same fate. The locket fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the stone hearth. The room spun. This wasn't a war over territory anymore. This wasn't about pack politics or business deals. This was about a monster who had murdered his wife and was now threatening his daughter. As the truth unraveled, the fragile bloom of hope in her chest withered and died, replaced by something cold, hard, and utterly unbreakable. Not fear, not grief. It was rage, a pure, silent, homicidal rage. When Malric walked into the lodge moments later, he found her staring into the fire, the silver locket gleaming at her feet. She looked up at him, and whatever he saw in her eyes made the most powerful alpha in the region take an involuntary step back. He killed her, she whispered, her voice a shard of ice. My father killed my mother, and now I'm going to help you destroy him.
The rage that came off Rowena was a palpable thing, a silent, freezing blizzard that filled the lodge. It was the rage of a woman who had just learned her entire life was built on a murderous lie. In that moment, Malric saw the true steel in her spine. This was no longer just his war. It was hers. They spent the next 2 days in the war room, planning. Her knowledge of her father's history, his tactics, his very soul, was their sharpest weapon. They were a team, a true Alpha and Luna, ready to bring down a tyrant. But they were too late. The tyrant struck first. Without warning, the great warning horn of the Warren blared, a deep, mournful cry that echoed off the mountains. A cry of invasion. Malric and Jax burst onto the main balcony. Below, the northern entrance to the Warren was under a full-scale assault. A tide of stone-fang warriors, more than he'd ever seen, crashed against their defenses. It's a diversion, Jax roared over the sounds of battle. Malric's blood ran cold. He knew it instantly. A frontal assault was not Croft's style. It was too direct, too crude. This was a distraction. The real attack was coming from somewhere else. As if fate demanded it, a second horn sounded from the south. A weaker, more desperate cry. The lower dens. Anya's voice crackled over the comms. Assassins. Not shifters. Humans. They're inside the Warren. The perfect, tactical nightmare. A pincer movement designed to split his forces, to create chaos, to decapitate the leadership. He was being forced into an impossible choice. Defend the walls and let the assassins gut them from within, or defend his home and let the Stonefangs overwhelm the gate. Jax! Malric's alpha command cut through the noise. You take the main gate. Repel the Stonefangs at all costs. Anya, rally the internal guard, hunt the assassins. I will take the southern dens. He had to go there because that path led directly toward the archives, toward Rowena. His heart pounded a frantic, terrifying rhythm. He was the Alpha. His duty was to command the entire battle, to be the strategic mind. But the mate bond screamed at him, a primal, undeniable command to go to her, to stand between her and the coming darkness. He leapt from the balcony, shifting into his massive wolf form mid-air. Fur the color of shadow, eyes of molten gold. He hit the ground running, a blur of silent speed. His pack needed him. But as he raced toward the sounds of fighting from within his home, only one thought consumed him, a desperate, silent prayer. Rowena, be safe.
The sounds of battle were a terrifying, chaotic symphony outside the archives. Rowena's hands trembled as she tried to focus on the maps, her heart lurching with every distant scream. Anya had been with her, a stoic, reassuring presence, until the second horn had sounded and she'd been forced to leave, pressing a small dagger into Rowena's hand. "Stay here, Luna. Bar the door. You are safest here." But the archives were no longer a sanctuary. They were a cage. She was alone, helpless, while the pack, her pack, fought and died. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her. Her father had done this. This was his answer to their defiance. The silence in the archives became more terrifying than the noise outside. The air grew cold. Then, a low scraping sound came from the far wall. A section of stone, disguised as a bookshelf, slid silently inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Her blood turned to ice. It was a secret entrance, one her father, whose family had owned this land centuries ago, would know about. And from the darkness, he emerged. Lord Valerius Croft stepped into the room, not with the fury of an attacker, but with the calm, unbothered air of a man entering his own study. He was flanked by two silent, black-clad assassins, their drawn blades gleaming in the lantern light. Her breath caught. The small dagger felt like a child's toy in her hand. "Hello, daughter," he said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. He looked around the dusty room, a look of faint disgust on his face. "Still hiding with your books, I see. Some things never change." He took a step closer, and her body moved on instinct, backing away until she hit a table. "Look at the chaos you have brought to these animals," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the door. "All this bloodshed, all these deaths. They welcomed you, and you brought ruin to their doorstep. A true Luna is a protector. You are a curse, a burden. Just as I have always said." His words. They were the same words he had used her entire life, but now they were honed to a razor's edge, sharpened by the screams outside. He was weaponizing her deepest, most painful flaw. "This is your fault, Rowena," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I am a merciful man. I will give you a chance to fix it." One of the assassins stepped forward, placing a small, lead-lined box on the table. Her father opened it. Inside, nestled on velvet, were several vials of a dark, oily liquid. "A potent, slow-acting toxin," he explained calmly. "My men are, as we speak, pouring it into the Warrens' main water cistern. It will not kill them quickly. No, it will sicken them, weaken them, so that when the Stonefangs finally break through the gate, they will find a pack of whimpering, helpless pups." Her world spun. This was a level of evil she couldn't comprehend. "But," he said, pushing a single, smaller vial toward her, "this is the antidote. Enough for all of them. And this," he placed a document beside it, "is a transfer of my family's land claims to the Stonefang Alpha, and a confession. It will end my alliance and save this pack." He smiled, a terrible, predatory expression. "All it requires is for you to disappear forever. Take a horse and ride east until you find the sea. If you are ever seen again, the confession is voided. He was offering her a choice. Let everyone she had come to care for die a slow, agonizing death, or prove him right. Prove that she was the problem, the burden, and that her absence was the only solution. He left. The secret panel slid shut, leaving her in a sudden, roaring silence. She was alone. Utterly, completely alone. The sounds of battle outside seemed to fade into a distant, muffled drumbeat, a funeral march for her soul. Her eyes were fixed on the table, the poison, the antidote, the choice. Her father's voice echoed in her head, weaving itself into the very fabric of her thoughts. You are a curse, a burden. This is your fault. She stumbled to the doorway, peering out into the main corridor. She saw pack members carrying a wounded warrior, his face pale, his breathing shallow. She saw a child crying for its mother, who was arming herself with a spear. She saw smoke and fear and death. And she believed him. Her newfound strength, her fragile confidence, it all shattered like glass. What had she truly brought this pack? She, the daughter of their greatest enemy. Her presence here had provoked this. Her defiance had signed their death warrants. Malric had claimed her. The pack had grudgingly accepted her. And in return, she had led a monster to their home. The goal, to destroy her father, now seemed like a child's fantasy. How could she fight a man who could orchestrate something so absolute? How could she win against a monster who knew the exact words to break her soul? In the quiet that followed, her thoughts spun into a vortex of despair. She could not let them die. She could not let Malric, who had shown her such unexpected kindness and respect, be weakened and slaughtered because of her. She couldn't. She looked at the antidote, and then at the confession that required only her erasure. Deep down, she knew the truth he had spent 40 years teaching her. She was the problem. She had always been the problem. And the only way to save the people she had come to love was to cut herself out of their lives like a cancer, to finally, willingly accept the role she had been born to play. The burden. Her entire body ached with a grief so profound, it felt like death itself. There was no victory to be had. There was no hope. There was only sacrifice. As the echo of a distant scream faded, she walked back to the table. Her movements were slow, heavy, as if she were wading through deep water. Her hand, cold and steady with resignation, reached for the document. Her father had won. He had broken her. And now, she would disappear. The pen felt as heavy as a gravestone in her hand. This was it, the final act of the burden. She would sign her name, save them all, and fade away into nothing. Her father's final, ultimate victory. Her fingers trembled as she lowered the nib toward the parchment, but then her eyes caught on the glint of silver on the floor. The locket. Her mother's locket. As if pulled by a string, she knelt and picked it up. The metal was cold against her skin, a chilling echo of the grave. She clicked it open, her gaze falling on the sad, beautiful face of the woman she barely remembered. A woman her father had also called a burden before shedding her like an old coat. Rage, hot and useless, warred with her despair. That's when she saw it. Tucked into the rim of the portrait, so small it was almost invisible, were a few faint, scratched words. An inscription. It wasn't elegant. It was clumsy, as if carved with a pin. My resilient girl. Her breath caught. It was her mother's handwriting, a secret message hidden for 20 years. Resilient. Not broken, not fragile, not a burden. Resilient. The word was a key, unlocking a door in her mind that had been sealed shut for decades. A flood of fragmented memories returned. Her mother teaching her to read in secret, her mother whispering stories of clever queens who outsmarted powerful kings, her mother's quiet, unyielding strength in the face of her father's cold cruelty. He hadn't just killed her mother. He had tried to erase her. He had tried to bury her strength, her resilience, her very essence under the weight of his own narrative, just like he was trying to do to her now. In the span of a breath, the crushing weight of despair did not just lift. It detonated. It exploded into a firestorm of pure, incandescent rage. The tears on her face were not tears of sorrow, but of fury. He would not win. He would not erase her. She was not a burden to be shed. She was her mother's resilient daughter. With a guttural cry, she swept the antidote and the confession from the table, sending them skittering across the floor. She grabbed the vial of poison and, without a second's hesitation, hurled it against the stone wall, where it shattered in a splash of dark, useless liquid. Her father wanted her to run. He wanted her to disappear. Instead, she would become the thing he could not escape. She ran to the map table, her mind suddenly, terrifyingly clear. There was no time for a frontal assault, no time to wait for Malric. She had to end this now. She had to use the weapon only she possessed, her father's history, his secrets. As her thoughts spun, a plan, desperate and brilliant, began to form. She scribbled a hasty note, leaving it on Malric's desk. Then she grabbed an old, heavy treaty case from the shelves, its leather cool and solid in her hands. She would not be the victim. She would not be the sacrifice. She would be the reckoning.
He fought his way back to the heart of the warren like a man possessed. The battle at the southern dens had been a bloody, desperate affair, but his warriors had held. The assassins were dead or captured. But with every enemy he cut down, the fear for Rowena grew, a cold, sharp blade in his gut. He left Jax to manage the cleanup and sprinted toward the archives, his heart pounding a rhythm of pure dread. He was expecting to find her huddled in fear, or worse. He found the room empty. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. The shattered vial on the floor, the papers scattered everywhere. It looked like a struggle. He scanned the room, his senses on fire, searching for any sign of her, any scent of her captors. Had Croft taken her? But then he saw it. On his desk, placed squarely in the center, was a note. It was her handwriting, swift and sure. He did not take me. He underestimated me. Meet me at the old border stones. I will not be a burden. I will be their ruin. As the words settled, his panic was consumed by a tidal wave of fierce, breathtaking pride. She had not broken. She had not run. She had gone to face the monster herself. He didn't know what her plan was, but he trusted her. He trusted her resilience, her mind, her unbreakable spirit. This was his Luna. Without another word, he spun on his heel, his voice an alpha's roar that echoed through the halls. Anya, Jax, to me, gather every warrior who can still stand. We are going hunting. His pack, bloody but unbowed, rallied to his call. They were not going to rescue a damsel in distress. They were going to war, to support their queen in the final move of a deadly game she had decided to end on her own terms. As they charged out of the warren and into the pale light of dawn, he let his own wolf surge forward. He would tear the world apart for her. And he prayed to every god he didn't believe in that he would get there in time.
The old border stones were gray, ancient monoliths that stood in a clearing where the Croft lands had once met the Shadow Moon territory. The air was cold, thick with a tense, waiting silence. She stood alone in the center of the clearing, the heavy treaty case in her hand. She felt strangely, terrifyingly calm. Soon after, they arrived. Her father, Lord Valerius, emerged from the eastern trees, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. From the west, the hulking, brutal form of the Stonefang Alpha appeared, his warriors fanning out behind him. They saw her, alone and seemingly defeated, and her father's smirk widened. He believed he had won. "Daughter," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have made the wise choice. I trust you have the document?" The Stonefang Alpha grunted. "Enough talk, Croft. Is it done? Did she sign?" "Patience, my friend," her father said smoothly. "Let the girl complete her final useful act." Rowena walked forward, her steps even and deliberate. She did not look at the Stonefang Alpha. Her eyes were locked on her father. She held out the treaty case. I have the document that will end this, she said, her voice clear and steady. Her father reached for it, his eyes gleaming with victory. But when he opened the case, his smile vanished. It was not his confession. It was an ancient, brittle piece of parchment, covered in the faded script of their ancestors. "What is this?" he hissed. "That," Rowena said, her voice ringing with a power she never knew she possessed, "is the original treaty, signed by your great-grandfather and the Stonefang Alphas, the one that ceded this land to the Shadowmoon Pack in exchange for a vow of mutual protection against the Northern Hunters." She turned her gaze to the Stonefang Alpha, whose face was now a mask of confusion. "A treaty, I might add, that contains a specific clause. Article 4. It states that any alliance made by one pack with the enemies of the other renders all land claims and treaties between them null and void. By allying with my father against the Shadowmoon, you have forfeited your claim to the silver mines on his southern border." The tension broke. The Stonefang Alpha's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting from the treaty to Lord Valerius. A low, menacing growl rumbled in his chest. "What is this trickery, Croft? You told me the mines were part of our deal. You told me this land was neutral." Her father's face was a mask of pure fury. "A forgotten, irrelevant piece of paper." "It is not irrelevant," Rowena declared. "It is law. He used you. He was never going to give you the mines. He was using your warriors to weaken his rival so he could claim everything for himself." As if summoned by the chaos, a new sound filled the air, a sound that was pure, beautiful terror. It was the howl of the Shadowmoon Pack. Between one breath and the next, Malric emerged from the trees, a massive, shadowy wolf at his side, flanked by dozens of his warriors. He was not looking at the Stonefang Alpha. He was looking at her, and his golden eyes burned with a love and pride so fierce it took her breath away. The trap was sprung, the alliance was shattered, and the final battle was about to begin. The Stonefang Alpha let out a roar of pure, betrayed fury, but it wasn't directed at Malric, it was directed at her father. "You lied to me," he bellowed, lunging not toward the Shadowmoon warriors, but toward Lord Valerius. The battlefield erupted into chaos. A three-way war. Stonefang fought Shadowmoon, and Stonefang fought Croft's few hidden mercenaries. It was a maelstrom of violence. In the center of it all, Malric, now in his massive wolf form, met the Stonefang Alpha head-on. The two alphas crashed together with a sound like boulders splitting apart, a whirlwind of claw and fang. Her father, his face a mask of pale, murderous rage, turned to her. He ignored the battle raging around them, his entire world narrowing to the daughter who had ruined him. "You worthless creature," he hissed, drawing a slim, poisoned dagger from his coat. "You were always a mistake." He lunged, but she was no longer the girl who flinched. The world slowed. She saw his move, anticipated it. Instead of retreating, she used the heavy treaty case in her hand as a shield, deflecting the blow. The dagger clattered against the hardened leather. Before he could recover, she swung the case with all her might, striking his wrist with a sickening crack. He screamed, a high, pathetic sound, and staggered back, clutching his broken hand. He looked at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had never seen her as a threat. That was his greatest mistake. Her attention was pulled away by a roar of pain. Malric. The Stonefang Alpha had pinned him, his massive jaws snapping inches from Malric's throat. Her mate was wounded, a deep gash bleeding freely from his shoulder. He was losing. Without thinking, her body moved on instinct. She grabbed a fallen Stonefang banner, a heavy wooden pole with a sharp iron tip. As her father stared in shock, she ran, not away from the fight, but into the heart of it. "Malric!" she screamed. He heard her. His head turned for a split second. It was all the distraction she needed. With a desperate, primal cry, she drove the iron tip of the banner pole deep into the earth just behind the Stonefang Alpha, the heavy cloth unfurling directly in his face. Blinded and startled, the beast reared back, giving Malric the single heartbeat he needed. He surged upward, his jaws closing around the Stonefang Alpha's throat. It was over in a second of brutal, final silence. As the body of his rival fell, Malric, in his wolf form, turned his bloody head and looked at her. And in his golden eyes, she saw not just victory, but a look of pure, unadulterated awe. Her father, clutching his broken wrist, tried to scramble away, to flee into the woods, but he was suddenly surrounded by Jax and a wall of grim-faced Shadow Moon warriors. There was no escape. The fighting died down. The Stonefangs surrendered. Her father was captured. And in the sudden, ringing silence of the dawn, Rowena stood amidst the wreckage, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had not been a burden. She had been the weapon, the shield, and the turning point. She was free.
The immediate aftermath was a controlled, grim business. He shifted back to his human form, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder. His pack came first, always. He had the healers tend to the wounded, his voice a calm, steady command that cut through the lingering shock of battle. He approached the surviving Stonefangs who were kneeling, leaderless and defeated. "Go back to your lands," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Tell them the Shadow Moon Pack honors old laws. We will not seek vengeance, but if you ever cross our borders again, we will wipe your memory from these mountains." They scrambled away, grateful for a mercy they did not deserve. Then, he turned to the final piece of business. Lord Valerius Croft, her father. He was on his knees, held between two warriors, his face a pathetic mask of hatred and disbelief. "Kill me and be done with it," Croft spat, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. Malric looked at the man who had caused so much death, who had broken the woman he loved. A quick death was too easy. It was an escape. A man like Croft feared one thing above all else: public humiliation. The loss of his name, his power, his legacy. "No," Malric said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Death is a mercy. You will stand trial before the Regional Council of Alphas and Lords. Your crimes, all of them, will be laid bare for the entire world to see. Your name will become a curse. Your legacy will be one of treason and shame." He had to do it this way, because justice was more important than revenge. He saw the flicker of true terror in Croft's eyes, and it was more satisfying than any killing blow could ever be. He turned to Jax. "Take him away. See that he reaches the council alive." As his men dragged the sputtering lord away, Malric's gaze swept over his people. They were bloody and exhausted, but they were victorious, and they were all looking past him. He turned and saw Rowena standing alone, her face pale but her eyes clear and strong. As he watched, Griselda, the old elder, walked up to her, bowed her head, and murmured a single word he heard across the clearing. "Luna." One by one, the other pack members followed suit, bowing their heads in a silent, profound display of loyalty and awe. She had not just earned their respect. She had earned their devotion. His heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. His father's pack had been broken by trust. His pack had just been saved by it. His duty done, he walked toward her, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, his every step taking him home.
Later that day, she stood on the great balcony of the main lodge, the same place Malric had stood when the attack began. The sun was warm, a gentle balm on the wounded valley. Below, the pack was already rebuilding, the sounds of hammers and quiet conversation replacing the sounds of battle. The air smelled of clean snow and wood smoke. It smelled of peace. She ran a hand over the rough-hewn wooden rail. It felt solid, real. For 40 years, she had lived a life of silence and shadows, a ghost in her own home. But here, breathing the free mountain air, she was not a ghost. She was solid. She was real. She was the Luna of the Shadow Moon, a title she had never asked for, but one she had earned. The quiet ache in her chest was not grief, but a kind of peaceful sorrow for the woman she used to be. She had survived. She had found her strength, not in a fated bond, but in the dusty, forgotten books of her past. She had found it in her mother's hidden message. She had found it in herself. A warm presence settled behind her, and she didn't have to turn to know it was him. Malric came to stand beside her, his arm wrapping gently around her waist, careful of her bruises. He didn't speak for a long time. They just stood together, watching their people, their home. "Is the pain bad?" she finally asked, her voice soft. "It's nothing," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "The healers say I will have a very impressive scar." He paused. "A scar to match my very impressive mate." She leaned her head against his good shoulder, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The sizzling energy of the mate bond was still there, a constant, fiery hum beneath her skin. But it was mingled now with something deeper, quieter, and infinitely stronger. A partnership. A hard-won, battle-tested love. "My father once told me I was an asset that failed to appreciate," she said quietly, the memory no longer holding any pain. "He was a fool," Malric rumbled, his voice full of a beautiful, terrible certainty. "You are not an asset. You are the foundation, the rock upon which our future is built." He turned her to face him, his golden eyes soft, all the hardness and pain of the battle washed away, leaving only an ocean of love. He lowered his head and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that was not a claim, but a promise of shared sunrises, of quiet moments, of a life built together. As her soul answered his, she knew the core question of her heart had finally been answered. The love born from power had not been another cage. It had been the key, and she was finally, truly free.